Hello, sweet friends, and welcome to another Soul Signature Hangout. It has been my honor to bring you people that I deeply respect and admire through the medium of technology.
Hmm.
And today I have the absolute honor of sharing with you my brother and a pioneering soul who has dedicated his life to bringing humanity the next evolutionary impulse required for us to own all that we are. Gregg has written countless books and has established himself as an authority all over the world on how we as human beings can really transform our experience and why we must recognize the oneness of all life at this particular juncture in our evolution above all others. He's a fascinating man, and I am honored to be able to call him my friend. Welcome, Gregg Braden, to our Soul Signature Hangout.
Hey, Panache, it's so good to see you, and I'm really honored to be with you and our global family. I'm not sure how many people are with us today. This is the first time I've ever done a Google Hangout in this respect. So this is new for me, and I like trying new things. It's a lot of fun. I want to thank you for your trust and your dedication, your vision, your friendship, certainly, Panache, over the years, and for inviting me into your circle of family and friends. This means a lot to me today. Thank you.
You know, here's what I love about you. You are so open-hearted and so generous, and there is such a way about you that speaks volumes. And when I encounter that, it deeply touches my heart because I have a moment of recognition in my life of, oh, I'm not alone. There are other people out there who are the same way, who are really embodying this collaborative expression in a greater way than we could ever imagine, and who are really pioneering in ways that are profound. And
Uh,
you know, in having you here and sharing this space with you, I just want you to know that it means everything to me because ultimately it's this communion and it's this merging of expressions that allows the people at home and all over the world to also know beyond any shadow of a doubt that they're not alone and that people will show up to support them and that people will show up to remind them and that there is a greater play that is unfolding here. And so, you know, I know how busy you are, and I'm personally very grateful that you made the time. And I
mm.
can't wait to. I'm so overjoyed to share you with everybody, Greg. Um, your expression is beautiful, and the way in which you bridge science and you bridge esoteric and ancient teachings is just masterful. I mean, I've sat through your presentations, and I've seen you weave the ancient mystical knowledge with the modern day scientific data required to allow people to actually cognitively own being the change.
Um,
How did you end up there? Like what was the evolutionary curve that you followed to get to that point?
so you're going to start with the easy questions first, right? Is how did this come about? You know, that's the most difficult thing for an author to do, rather than talking about their work, is to talk about themselves and their own lives, right?
I have
I Well, this is completely unscripted, so I'm going to follow your lead, and we've never had this conversation, so um, it's a good question, Panache, and it's a question I'm often asked in one form or another. People often ask how I made what they see, what they perceive as a quantum leap from the world of science and technology into the world of the heart and spirituality and esoteric traditions. So it's a good question. And I guess I think for me, the first time I heard the question, I was actually surprised. And that goes to the heart of my answer to the question. In my life, uh, when I was a child, I never made the distinction between science and spirituality. I was born and raised in a very conservative community in the Midwest, northern Missouri. Really good people, very entrenched in their beliefs and their values. And spirituality, it wasn't something that people talked about every day on the one hand, and on the other hand, I assumed that other people believed much as I did and just didn't talk about it. And what that belief was that when we study what we call science, we study biology and chemistry and geology and physics, those are individual facets of a greater experience that is directly linked to our spirituality. And I've always made the distinction between spirituality and religion, and I think it's important to make that distinction. For me, spirituality has always been about us and our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to other people, our relationship to our earth, to the world, to our past, and the way that we go about solving whatever life brings to our doorstep each day. Sometimes they're problems, sometimes they're opportunities, but it's how we deal with life every day. To me, that was the essence of spirituality. That came first. Later, people came, humans came, and they wrapped the rules and the dogma, in some cases the stigma, around what those rules mean to us and how we live them in our lives. Those became the religions. And what I found as a child, I'll just tell you, can I just tell you the story? I'll just tell you the story.
Yes, absolutely.
My my parents, my father left our family technically when I was 9, legally when I was 10. And my mom wasn't prepared for that. I have one brother. Mom had 2 sons. I have a younger brother, 4 years younger than I am. And when the family broke up, it immediately put us into a situation that we had never been in before. A lot of it was poor finances. And we ended up moving we moved every year. And every year we moved pretty much low-income housing, government-subsidized housing, what people sometimes would call the projects. And every year I would have to make new friends in school in a very different crowd. And when I made those friends, they were of very different religious and spiritual persuasions. So what I found was that I would go with my friends to their church or their synagogue or their mosque or the, whatever it was, whatever their tradition was. And I found that I was very, very comfortable. I was just as comfortable in a mosque as I was in a synagogue, as I was in the Catholic Church, as I was with my native friends in the wilderness. To me, each of those experiences, it was one facet, Panache, of our experience and our relationship to the world. But on the one hand, on the other hand, I found that none of them seemed to me to be complete in the teachings. They were all facets, but none of them really held all the answers in my childhood. So that was the foundation, the upbringing. As an adult, what I found was that my belief that we all had similar views, nothing could be further from the truth. When I was in the corporations, at the water fountain or in the cafeteria, what I found was that there was a very, very powerful distinction and a very strong line that was drawn between science and spirituality. And I was actually told point blank, direct words from my superiors, Gregg, you have to make a choice. You must choose between science or spirituality. They are mutually exclusive. You cannot serve both masters, is the word, that's the language that was using. You cannot follow both paths and be effective in this job. Now, when I heard that, I'm just going to fast forward a little bit. I was a degree geologist and earth scientist. I worked at Phillips Petroleum in Denver, Colorado. During the first oil and energy crisis, the first one in the 1970s. In the 80s, I went to work for the Defense Department as a civilian, writing computer software. I was a senior computer systems designer and a liaison for the Air Force, writing software for the nuclear weapons program. And you can imagine I went through a lot of stuff. I had a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of dreams, a lot of issues about why me? Why am I here? What is this all about? But it actually made perfect sense, Panache, and it all came together, and it'll bring all of this together very quickly. Because by day, I found myself behind the scenes writing software for the potential of a war that was unthinkable. And it was a very frightening time in the history of our world when the former Soviet Union, the United States, we developed enough nuclear weaponry that we could microwave the planet many times over. It was insane, absolutely insane, by day. By night, I was poring over and exploring every iota that I could find of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, looking for the clues that I was certain existed. in our past that would help us to heal the differences that have led to the wars that we're living in that time. And now, again, we're entering a new Cold War. Certainly the nuclear question has come up again. I was absolutely certain that if we look in the right places in the past, that our ancestors have left us the wisdom either of things that we used to know and we've forgotten that will help to heal the differences that divide us now, or they knew things that we're only now beginning to understand. The best science of our time is only now beginning to understand. And if I could find those things, Panache, that somehow I could contribute in a meaningful way to a great transformation, a shift away from the thinking that says we must kill what we don't understand, and the recognition that we're a global family. We are brothers and sisters in a very rare set of conditions that we call planet Earth. And the ability to recognize and cherish what we have now that we often take for granted. I felt that the keys for that would lie in those ancient traditions. So that led me on a journey. At first, it was through the libraries and the textbooks because I didn't have the money to travel. And as I progressed through my careers in the industry, I found it was possible to travel. And then first it was into Egypt, and then into Peru, and then it led me into Tibet and Bolivia and Nepal and India, all through the American desert Southwest. That is alive today. And much of it was hidden and preserved so that we would have it today from our most cherished and spiritual traditions. So my question became, what if we don't make the choice between science and spirituality? Rather, what would happen if we married these two great ways of knowing into a single wisdom that's more in the union than either could be individually? And what if we lived that in our lives? Where would that lead us? And every piece of work that I share today is another step in my quest to answer that question. I'm still searching for the answer, and I'm excited about where the information is leading. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question, but can I just share one more thing before?
Absolutely, of course you can.
Because I know a lot of our listeners, people say, well, you made this leap. What they see as the leap from science and spirituality, or from science and technology and the spirituality. To me, it was a logical progression. But I want to share a story with our listeners, because I know a lot of our listeners are in a place in their lives where they're thinking about doing something similar. They're thinking about leaving a job or a career that they've worked very hard to create, situations that they've worked very hard to create to try something new, and they say, how do you know when it's the right time? So I'm going to share my story of how I knew it was the right time. It was in the 1980s when I had completed a project for the defense industry, and they were so happy with the job that I had done that they were about to give me another assignment that would last 5 years. And I said to them, I cannot make a commitment to you for 5 years because I know I will leave this industry to write a book. And they said, well, that's fine, but what are you going to do for a living? And I said, well, I'm hoping that if I write a book, that is going to be my living. I didn't know for sure. And I was called into a director's office one day, and I had just asked the universe for a sign. And so we all know what happens when you ask the universe for a sign. I said, how do I know I'm doing the right thing? I was leaving the security of a good corporate job in the 80s, and it wasn't a really popular choice with my family, my friends, in all honesty, with my wife at the time. So I asked for a sign. So I went into my director's office, and he said to me, he said, son, he called me son, he said, what the hell do you think you're doing? He said, you're on the fast track with this company. You've got good security, good insurance, you're making good money. And so this was the first sign. He said, all you have to do is ride it out for 30 more years, and you've got it made. Just sit tight for 30 years in this security, and you're home. And I said, oh, God, 30 years. So then he became angry, and he said, son, if you walk out this door and you leave this company, I will see to it personally. Not only will you never work in this corporation, you will never work in this industry. I will blacklist your name from this industry. And I looked at him and I said, God, thank you, sir. I said, if there was ever a doubt in my mind, I was about to make the wrong decision. I said, you just erased any doubt. I'm making precisely the right decision. And that was the day that I left. And to bring that full circle, that man and a lot of my colleagues now come to the live programs that we do in Denver, Colorado, and they're in the audience. And he says, now I understand what happened to you in the 1980s, what you were feeling. Something he said that he couldn't understand at that time. But it was me asking for a sign, and I took those experiences as the sign to tell me that I was making the right choice and doing the right thing, because it felt like it inside. I felt like I had to contribute in some way. I didn't know if it would be meaningful, but for me, I had to do whatever I could to help bring the world to a better place. And my background in the sciences and in the defense industry during that time, that was the context within which I was having those experiences. So that is, again, a long answer to a short question, but we can tie into that now as we go through our program today.
Well, I'm so happy that you did, because you, my friend, are the closest thing to Indiana Jones I've ever met. And one of my favorite shows is Ancient Aliens, and you have been to every sacred site in the world. Does humanity have their origins rooted in other dimensional beings? Is that even vaguely or remotely a possibility in everything that you've explored? And where was the most extraordinary place you've ever been to?
Wow, well, there's 3 questions right there. I just want to clarify that I've not been to every one of the sacred sites in the world. What happened to me? 1986, I was powerfully drawn. I would almost use the word compelled to go to Egypt. I had never been as a child. I was fascinated by the Egyptian technology and the culture. We would go to a museum in Kansas City, Missouri, and I would always immediately go to the room with the Egyptian artifacts, and I wouldn't leave. I mean, I would cling to the glass cases. There was something there for me. So it was when I was in Egypt, a number of things happened for me. And the question you've just asked is a question that's been with me for a very long time. And what I found on the temple walls in Egypt said that we are not from this world. And our own science is telling us the same thing. You know that the composition of our bodies, Panache, we are closer chemically in composition to stardust than we are to the elements on this earth. We only are made of about 20 elements. Of the entire periodic table that you find for the earth, we're only made of about 20 of those. And of those 24, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, make up over 90% of our bodies. So the rest of the stuff of this world, we're not really made so much from that. Our body composition is closer to the composition of some of the stardust and the asteroids as we know them, and the meteors that as we've come to understand them now. So that's the science. The cultures that I have been to, from Egypt, I saw images on temple walls of beings that looked like they're not from around here. They were very tall. They were 11 feet tall. They had the big elongated craniums. You've seen pictures of those. And I said, you know, those are pictures. They could be stylized. I said, maybe it was just the artist's interpretation. How do we know those are real? But they led to a journey into southern Peru where I actually found the mummified remains of the beings that you see on the temple walls in Egypt. 11-foot tall mummies, elongated craniums, and they had technology at that time. They were able to do dental implants. I mean, quartz teeth embedded into the bones that were able to grow and people could enjoy them. Thousands of years ago, we were using, George Washington was using wooden wires in the 1700s for his false teeth. And the evidence, amazing mathematics and knowledge of the stars, knowledge of cycles of time, agriculture. They were able to grow food in sustainable ways, create energy in sustainable ways, long before the 20th century. So my question is, where did these people come from? How did they know what they have come to know? Those journeys led me into the monasteries of the highlands of central China and Tibet, some of them almost 17,000 feet above sea level, in the rare libraries that still remain and the practices that are perpetuated based on the teachings in those books. And it all comes back to us and our relationship to our hearts. Interestingly enough, the people and the traditions all say that we're not from this world. They say if you want to see what an alien looks like, look at the person next to you, because we're not from here. However, we are here now. This is our home for now. But this isn't such a far-out question as some people might think it seems, because it's the reason that we're here now is why access to our heart is so important. So I'm just going to back up a little bit. I know some of our listeners have been to maybe Six Flags over Mid-America or Six Flags over Texas or Disneyland. And we've walked in to those exhibits that are simulations. They're digital simulations. You walk into a room and you see a waterfall and you see trees and you see animals, and they look just as real as you and me, but they're not. They are computer digital simulations. There is a serious scientific course of study and inquiry asking whether or not this world is a simulation like those experiences are. Are we living a virtual reality? Now, some people say, man, that is just so far out there, it just sounds nuts. But when you think about it, our most ancient, indigenous, and cherished spiritual traditions essentially tell us precisely this. What they say, Panache, is that we are in this world temporarily, okay? They say that we're on our way to another world. And in this world, we're learning the keys that will help us to thrive in that next world. They call this the world of the illusion or the Maya. So this isn't the end. This is a bridge to another world. And that is precisely what a simulation is all about. So then you ask the question, what is the purpose of a simulation? A simulation is that so the people in the simulation can learn in safety a way of being that will serve them when they get to wherever they're going. So for example, our astronauts, when they go to the moon, they learn how to be on the moon in a safe place where they can make mistakes in a laboratory. One of those was in Denver, Colorado, the company I was working for. So it's not so far-fetched when we really look at what science is telling us about our world, the Big Bang, when this experience began. We don't know what happened before that. And the way that what's called the digital universe is unfolding. And we're all learning something. Now, I don't know precisely what it is we're learning, but my center and how when we think and feel in our lives, time and time again, those thoughts and feelings are reflected to us in the world around us. Our relationships, our jobs, our romance, our careers are all mirrors of what we are creating, and we're learning it relatively safely in this world. My sense is when we leave this world, whether we call it heaven, or whatever it is that we're going to call it in our next world, these tools are going to be the keys to thrive in those new environments. And to answer your question, our ancient indigenous traditions, to the T, every one that I've studied, every one of them says that we are the product of a greater intelligence from another place, and that we are here temporarily, whether it's the Maya, whether it is the Tibetan, the Buddhist traditions, Tibetan Buddhists, whether it's the Egyptian traditions, they link us to the star system Sirius, the Dogon in Africa link us to the star system Sirius. So I think if we're honest with ourselves, two things. We're here now, and this is what's important, and I think it's important to focus on what's here now. But ultimately, when we ask the question, who are we and what are we capable of, I think the answer is so awesome that many of us are afraid to even embrace the answer. Now, that has led to a book. The very first book I ever wrote with Hay House was called The God Code. And that was, and by the way, the research from The God Code continues, and the new revised edition will be released probably sometime this next year. So if our listeners aren't familiar with the God Code, it was my way of sharing in the world what a number of scientists have already discovered, but they haven't made it, they haven't shared it publicly. There's been a reluctance in the mainstream to share it. And the bottom line is that the DNA in our bodies, what we call DNA, and our scientists actually call it the language of life, the code of life. In studying those ancient texts and ancient traditions, what I found was that there were direct links between the elements of the DNA that give us life on the one hand and the alphabets of ancient languages on the other hand, a link between life and ancient alphabets. And when I was able to explore and confirm those links, the bottom line is that if we know how to read the DNA in our bodies, if we know how to replace the hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon in our bodies with letters of ancient alphabets, there is a literal message. It reads like the page on a book inside the DNA of every one of our listeners, every blade of grass, every form of life. The message is in layers. And the first layer was the essence of the book, the God Code, and it literally reads as the words God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. And the spelling of the word God in our DNA is precisely the spelling that we see in the root languages of Sanskrit, Arabic, and ancient Hebrew. So why is that message in our bodies? I can't answer why. All I can say as a scientist, when I follow the clues in a 3,000-year-old text, using the best science of today, it reveals the answer maybe to the question you asked about 20 minutes ago. Who are we? Where do we come from? The odds that this message could be within us as a fluke are about 1 in 256,000, 1 to 256 chance, 1 in 256,000 times that it could be a fluke, or 0.00041% chance. So it means that there probably is a great intelligence underlying our existence in this world, our world in general. Science is arriving at that conclusion, some through exploring virtual reality and simulations, and others through exploring the DNA in their bodies. We bring all that together, and it helps us to think of ourselves, I think, in a very empowering way that's very different for many people than what we've been led to believe in the past, especially a boy from Missouri, growing up in the Midwest. Nobody talked about things like this. Does all that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect. We could be here for hours.
I know.
It's so fascinating because all along I've said we're vibrational beings and we inhabit the vibrational universe. And it's no accident that Sanskrit and Hebrew and ancient Arabic are vibrational languages. And so, based on what you've said, actually the chanting or resuscitation of these sacred syllables and sound vibrations have the ability to actually align, activate, and regenerate our DNA. And it's so funny how everything's come full circle. And I guess my question then is, if life is holographic in its nature, and we are indeed in this hologram or in this illusion, this vibrational play, how do we transcend it? What is it that the ancients have said that we need to do as individuals to transcend it?
And I think that's the key word. So many people say, how do we survive the great crises of our time or the great challenges? And my answer to that is, you don't want to just survive. You don't want to just hang on by a thread to get through the tough times. We have the opportunity to transcend, to become more than the great challenges that we see. Some people see them as crises. We are living a time of extremes, and I think it's fair to say that. Not necessarily bad things or even good things, but definitely big things, big changes happening in our lives today. My sense, Panache, is that those extremes are pushing us to the very edge of what we claim to be true as individuals, families, communities, as nations. Now, you can get caught up in the minutia of the rightness or the wrongness about what's happening. And I think it's important to explore those. But when you look at the big picture, I'm a systems kind of guy. And I think a lot of our listeners probably are as well. I like to look at the big picture to see where everything fits. And once I understand that clearly, I like to zero in on the nano instant of my life to see how my choices fit into that big picture. Because if my choices go against the flow of a greater energy, or they are not in harmony with a greater sense, then I'm probably not going to be successful in my relationships, my love, my careers, my family, the healing of my body, being able to support my loved ones when they're going through tough times. This is where I think the greater understanding really comes into play in terms of our everyday lives. I wrote a book or released a book in 2010. It was called Deep Truth. A brilliant scientist, a man I have so much respect for, Niels Bohr, made a statement. And he was having a conversation with Albert Einstein. I wish I could have been there that day. It was before I was born. But what he said to Einstein was they were talking about the nature of truth. And in their conversation, it was the nature of scientific truth. And what Niels Bohr said to Einstein, he said, it is the hallmark of any deep truth that its negation is also a deep truth. Now, the first time I saw that, I had to really think about it because it's deep. It is deep. What he was saying is that when the things that we have accepted as truth, and in this case it was in science, when they are overturned, the new discoveries then become the new truth. The new discoveries become the new deep truth. I thought that was important to share in a book because there are 6 key parameters that we have been steeped in. Everyone listening, no matter what country we live in, everyone listening to this, unless we were very fortunate in a very forward-thinking family, we have been steeped in a story, a scientific story about us and our relationship to ourselves and the world, and the story is based in separation. We have been taught that we're separate from our bodies, almost powerless when it comes to healing our bodies, that our bodies just kind of magically do their own thing. We've been taught that we're separate from the people around our bodies, from the world around our bodies, that we're separate from our past. And we've been taught for at least 150 plus years that we live in a world based upon competition and conflict, that nature, the model of nature, is actually based upon competition and conflict. Now, people say to me, okay, Greg, new discoveries have changed all that. What difference does it make? And it's a really good question, because the consequence, consciously and subconsciously, we are so entrenched in these ideas of separation that they show up in our lives, in our personal lives, when we're in intimate contact in our with our family members that we live with day in and day out, and we have a disagreement. We often will go, more often than not, we'll go immediately to the words that will hurt and create even more separation. That's our training. That is survival of the strongest. We've all heard that we live in this dog-eat-dog world. If we want to see what the consequences are, Panache, of how deeply these ideas are entrenched in our lives, it's the world that we have right now. Some parts of the world are working really well, and there's a lot of parts of the world that are breaking down. The economic model that is failing in the world is based upon separation, survival of the strongest. The way that we deal with disappearing resources, whether it's energy or food or water or vital medicine, sharing technology, survival of the strongest. The way we're trying to solve problems in the Middle East, in Africa, in between North Korea and South Korea, I mean, wherever it is, they are all ideas based in this model of competition, conflict, and separation. The problem is that the best science of the 21st century has now overturned every one of those old ideas. And it's no longer theory, it's no longer a hypothesis, wishful thinking or New Age thinking. This is peer-reviewed science published in peer-reviewed scientific journals telling us that we live in a world where we are deeply connected to our bodies, number one. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs trigger the chemistry in our brain that determines what happens in our bodies. We are just as deeply connected to the world beyond our bodies. Quantum physics is telling us this. Biology is now telling us that while we all know, and we've all seen, we don't want to deny that competition happens, conflict happens, we know that. The key is it's not the fundamental model of nature. When we see violent competition, it's in response to a specific circumstance. It's not the general rule, not the general model of nature. So when you put all this together and you say, who are we? The new discoveries of science give us the reason to think differently about ourselves if we need that reason. But what I found is that for many people, the new discoveries support for their mind what they've always felt in their hearts to begin with, that we are, in fact, deeply connected to ourselves, to one another, to our world, and that we are empowered to participate. And I think that's a really important word. It's not about control or manipulation or imposing our will on other people or the world. We're empowered to participate in the healing of our bodies, in the quality of our relationships and our families and our communities, and now between nations. So I think this is where it's really hard to draw the line between our personal lives and the big world out there. People used to say, you know, I don't care about the world out there, I just want to get through this day. We're finding it more and more difficult to separate the world out there from getting through our day because we are so deeply connected. The economy of Europe is affecting whether or not we can save money for our kids to go to school and our retirement, and what we pay. The energy decisions that are made halfway around the world are affecting our weekly budget and what we pay for food and what we pay for gas at the gas pump. I mean, it's not all about money, but these are examples. So we are now given new reasons to think differently about ourselves. Science gives us those reasons. Our most cherished spiritual traditions always offered the explanations, but they weren't done in science. So now I think it's up to us. What do we choose to embrace in our lives, and how do we choose to live our lives? What deep truth do we choose to live day in and day out? I think a lot of our listeners know my wife, Martha, and I, we live in northern New Mexico, in a rural area of northern New Mexico. And we're surrounded by indigenous people. Between Albuquerque and Taos, New Mexico, 7 separate Pueblo traditions, and their villages and their way of life are preserved in that span of less than 100 miles. The Navajo, the Hopi are very closest to us, or very close to us. And all of them teach these traditions of our relationship to the world and our connection, our deep connection. But some of them go even further and give us the tools, and I think this is what's important, the tools. How do we honor that connection? For me, the experience of beauty has always been really, really powerful in my life. When I left the corporations, I had to make a choice. Do I want to live in the convenience of a city where I can walk to everything? That's nice. Or do I want to wake up surrounded by beauty that makes my heart sing every morning? That's nice as well. I'd lived in big cities all my life, so I chose to live in a rural area because of the beauty, the smells of the mountains, the clean air, the sage that surrounds us. So the Navajo of northern New Mexico, they take this idea of beauty very seriously, and it actually becomes a way of life. And they have something that's called the beauty prayer, that is essentially a mantra or an affirmation that they share every day. And it's very simple, 3 lines: the beauty that I live with, the beauty that I live by, the beauty upon which I base my life. The beauty I live with, because it's always there. The beauty I live by, it's our job to seek out the beauty that we choose to see in the world. That's powerful. The beauty upon which I base my life. Do we identify with the fear and with the really nasty things happening, or do we identify with the beauty that we see? And Mother Teresa was a master at this. She'd wake up in the morning and walk down the streets of Calcutta, and in a pile of dung in the gutter, in the stench, in the filth of the streets of Calcutta, she would see a flower growing in the dung, and in that flower she would find beauty in the streets of Calcutta and choose to see that and base her life on that beauty rather than the other things that were happening. I share that, just an example that comes to mind. So this idea of beauty, the indigenous people that I have spent time with, the Tibetans, the shaman in the Andes Mountains of southern Peru and Bolivia, here in the desert Southwest, beauty is more than simply an aesthetic. It literally to them is a force of nature, like gravity. It is another force of nature. And it is something that we embrace, but it's also something that we create in our lives as well. So it's our choice as to whether or not we find that beauty in our lives or not. So I'm going to stop there and just for a moment and let you chime in. But I've got something else about beauty and the power of the heart that I want to share before we leave today.
Well, that's amazing, because I think that ultimately, more and more, if this is a holographic simulation, it's all a vibrational universe, then it's as we see it. And I think that if we can actually use beauty as almost like a glitch in the matrix to remind us of our inherent beauty and our true nature, then what better tool to leverage than that? Because right now, what we see through the mass media isn't beauty. What we're constantly being bombarded with is fear. And why? Because it keeps us in our reptilian brain. It keeps us in our fight or flight. That's why. So just imagine right now, if all of you watching right now could begin to find the beauty and could almost create an unreasonable relationship with that word, to the point where you look for it even where most would say that it doesn't exist. Because the truth is, wherever there is life, there is beauty. And all that's required is your willingness to see it, to then enable other people in this greater vibrational ecosystem that we inhabit to begin to perceive that beauty as well. And so that's beautiful. I mean, Greg, that's absolutely so empowering. And I think especially now, because it's so hard right now to see that when we're constantly being bombarded by everything that isn't. And so I can't wait to hear how that ties into the heart and how we make that shift, brother.
Well, one of the beautiful things is that nature is simple, science is simple. The principles of science are very, very simple until we make them complex. With our language or with the symbols of mathematics, for example, if you're an engineer, you need those symbols, but to embrace the principles, we don't. And this idea of beauty, the eloquence with which it is embraced in native traditions all over the world, indigenous traditions all over the world, and the simplicity of that beauty prayer. I say it to myself many times every day. The beauty that I live with, the beauty that I live by, the beauty upon which I base my life. And there's something just about those words. Again, it's the acknowledgement that the beauty's already there. Our job, we are tasked with recognizing its existence, embracing it, and making it a part of our lives. One of the new discoveries, Panache, that I'm writing, actually, it's in a new book that I'm writing right now, so it'll be in much more detail, certainly, than I'm able to share right now. As a scientist, what I found when I go to the conferences is that scientists are always focused on the brain. It's all about the brain, forget about the heart. When I go into New Thought, progressive conferences, what some people call New Age conferences, people say, forget about the brain, that's the ego, that gets you in trouble, it's all about the heart. Both of them are incomplete, and there's a new discovery that now really helps us to embrace this. And the discovery is the fact that over 40,000, in the average human, about 40,000 cells called sensory neurites, it's a technical word for brain-like tissue, have been found in the human heart in a way that scientists didn't expect to see it. So it's not the shape of the brain in our head, but those 40,000 cells function as a brain in our hearts. Our heart literally has its own brain. That brain is capable of memory, independent of the cranial brain. It is capable of experience. It is capable of sensing the environment. It is capable of actually thinking, and it thinks much faster than the cranial brain because it doesn't go through the filters of ego, judgment, bias, self-esteem, which is what we call intuition. So the intuition in the heart, it is really fast because it doesn't go through those other filters. The key, and what the science is showing now, is rather than focusing only in the heart or only in the brain, is to marry the two together into the ultimate system that we were designed to embrace. And I think this is where we really begin to understand, who are we? We are immensely powerful beings when it comes to our relationship to ourselves and the world, if we will embrace the different facets of that power. This brings us full circle. Now, the science is talking about the brain and the heart. Our most cherished and ancient spiritual traditions actually left us tools and techniques to bring the heart and the mind together. They just didn't use the language of science to describe it. The Institute of Heart Math. I know you and I have talked about heart math in the past. Some of our listeners may or may not be familiar with them. It's capital H-E-A-R-T, capital M-A-T-H, but it's all one word. Pioneering research organization in Northern California. I've been affiliated with them about, not their employee, I've known and worked with them for about 20 years now. And they are pioneers in leading the research into the capabilities of the human heart beyond just pumping blood. You could build a machine to pump blood. What else does our heart do? And they are leading a lot of not only the research to confirm what we now understand, but the techniques to apply it in our lives. One of those techniques is establishing what's called coherence between the heart, the brain in our heart, and the brain, our cranial brain, establishing that coherence. And it's done through qualities of feeling in the heart, largely through qualities that we call appreciation, gratitude, care, compassion. Those are the kinds of words that set up this conversation through the nervous system between our heart and our brain that link the two together so that we have access to our intuition. We have access to the over 1,400 biochemical reactions that we set into motion, from our immune response to our anti-aging hormones. All of these are all linked directly now to our ability to optimize this conversation between our heart and our brain. The beauty is we don't have to know any of that. All we're doing is having a feeling. And this is where those very ancient, very cherished spiritual traditions, when I'm with the monks and the nuns in the monasteries, when I'm with the yogis in Nepal and India, when I'm with the shaman in the Andes of southern Peru and over in Bolivia, as different as they are from one another, they're all focused. Their traditions begin with the focus in the heart. Now we're beginning to understand why. So there's so much that we could say about this heart-brain connection. But I think it's another example of the separation, Panache. We've been led to isolate, compartmentalize, and separate our world and ourselves from one another. And nature just doesn't work that way. So our ancestors, they didn't separate. When I go into Peru, they don't separate science from art, from beauty in their everyday lives. Now that's important. So you think about this. If you don't separate science from art, what that means is that when you immerse yourselves in an experience of beauty and you feel that in your body and you get those goosebumps and that pitter-patter in your tummy and your head gets a little lightheaded just from the awesome beauty that you're seeing of being on a 15,000-foot mountain pass in the snow with the beautiful blue skies and a condor, flying below you. That feeling is actually triggering a whole cascade of chemical effects in the brain and in the heart that are feeding our body the chemistry that matches the beauty. They don't separate beauty and science. We do. So we say, don't pay attention to that. It's just something to look at. Here is the science, and I think this separation between the cranial brain and the heart is an expression of that. We've been taught to separate everything. And as we embrace the deepest truths of our connection, our connectivity to the world around us, our connection to ourselves, and what that brings to us in our lives, I think through that we begin to answer one of the deepest questions we could ever ask: who are we? And if we ever needed a reminder to tell our brain, tell our eyes the answer to that question, we need look no further than the DNA in every cell of our bodies, because the message is coded in a way that we now can read like the words on a page. Who are we? God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body.
I love that. That's beautiful. You know, and as we look back at the ancients and as we look back at their wisdom, do you think that we were encoded with a specific time-space marker in our DNA for this wake-up that's happening right now? Because it's flowering in so many different places around the world, Greg, that it's not an accident, it's not a coincidence. There has to be something on a deeper level within us that is calling us to even pursue these conversations and to travel to these places and to reconnect with that deeper truth. Is humanity on the verge of a deeper shift that we've been encoded to go through? Or is it just an accident? Like, what do you think about that?
I don't think it's an accident. It's a really good question, Panache, and it's there's so many ways to answer the question. For me, I think it's less about us being encoded for this moment. It's less about that. It's more about us living a series of cycles. Okay, and the cycles are, the terms are fractal and holographic. Each of those has its own meaning here. But we've all heard history repeats itself. Some people don't like that term. From fractal science, we know that history does repeat itself, but here's the key, and this, I think, is going to answer the question. As we go through cycles of change, as we experience the cycles, we are changed from within. So we adapt to the change, or we don't, and we suffer from the lack of adaptation. So every time we go through a big cycle of change, we are changed, hopefully to better adapt to the next cycle. But what happens with the cycles is, if you can imagine, what's a good way to do this? I've never done this on a Google Hangout. If we can imagine a tornado, a twister, for example, and the geometry of that twister, it's a cone. So if we could imagine that cone as the cycles of change, all right, the cycles begin with the broad cycles of change, and there's a long period of time before you see one place in that cycle come back again. As you go deeper into the cone, those cycles repeat more and more frequently and with greater intensity. And there is a school of thought, and scientists take this very seriously, that we are living a series of cycles. They're called fractal cycles. So, for example, in the biblical sense, the killing of the first man in the Bible, now that took a long time for those cycles to repeat. Now the wars between nations are a fractal of that killing of the first man. So it's a more intense experience of something that began long ago. The question is, as we go through each of the cycles, have we learned? What have we learned? And how have we learned to deal with those changes? And this, I mean, I know for some people this sounds like really esoteric or really out there on the one hand, and on the other hand, you go back to what science is telling us. We're in the 21st century, Panache, trying to explain our existence and life through a language that was formulated almost 7,000 years ago. When we update the language a little bit, and instead of in the beginning, we say when the hologram began, or when the simulation began. And instead of saying heaven, we say the next dimension. We're here to learn something. The simulations of the astronauts, they learn to walk on the moon. Our simulations, because they are so focused on good, evil, heart, emotions, I cannot help but believe it's about a way of being. We are exploring a way of being in these conditions where we can make mistakes relatively safely, but ultimately we're learning a way of being that is going to serve us when we go somewhere else. And one of the questions I asked, I talked to university research. You can actually get a university degree in the study. You can get a PhD in the study of virtual reality. That's how far along these ideas have come. You can have a PhD in whether or not we're living a simulation. My question, when I talked to the researchers, I said, aha, if we are living a simulation, where did the simulation begin? And they countered by asking me a question. They said, who benefits from a simulation?
Mm.
And the ones that benefit are the ones in the simulation. So the question then becomes, a long time ago, maybe in another realm, heaven or whatever we want to call it, did we create, have we created for ourselves an experience here so that we can come and learn and love and embrace and empower what it means to be an emotional being in this environment so that we can take what we've learned into another world and live a life of peace and joy, an eternal life of peace and joy. It's a big question, and I think the science, now here's the kicker. The scientific analysis, the computer simulations that are designed to tell us whether or not we're living in a simulation, they say there's over a 98% chance that what we call our reality is a simulated environment, and that we're not really here. My dear brother, colleague, and friend, Dr. Bruce Lipton, he and I have these conversations a lot. Some of our listeners I know are familiar with the biology of belief. Bruce, he is just, we toured through Europe on the train a couple of years ago, and we got to talk, long conversations. And The Matrix, we were talking about the movie The Matrix. He said, yeah. He said, a lot of people think that's science fiction. He said, but I think it's more of a documentary. He said The Matrix is a documentary telling us that we're not really in this world, and that is precisely what our most cherished ancient spiritual and indigenous traditions have always told us. So while we are here, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to embrace the safety and explore the power of our hearts and our bodies. How deeply can we love one another? How far can we take this love on a global basis? And what can we do with this world in the presence of an infinite power of love from our hearts? And I think you and me, our listeners, our family and friends, we're answering that question through our lives right now.
Mm.
Yeah.
I have a question that's completely unrelated, but I have to ask you, and I've wanted to ask
Okay.
you from the day I met you. You have the nicest hair in soul business. What is your daily routine?
My daily routine. I'll tell you. Well, thank you. Thank you for the compliment. I'm happy it's there. I'm in my 60s now, so I'm happy it's there. And I'll be very honest. My hair turned silver the month that I buried my father. We had a very difficult relationship.
Oh.
He left the family. I didn't know him very well.
Mm.
And his new wife, asked me to do the memorial service for him, and I did. And
Mm-hmm.
by the end of that month, my hair started turning silver, and it hasn't stopped. So there's probably a deep correlation there between my relationship with my father, whatever that meant then, what it means, it's evolving, what it means to me now. And I'm just happy that it's all still here. And thank you. I think living in high elevation has a lot to do with changes the pH in your body.
Mm.
We live about 8,000 feet above sea level. It creates more alkaline blood chemistry. I think diet and exercise is a big part of that, and part of it is just, I think it is DNA.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
thank you
Thank
for the
you.
compliment. I appreciate it. Hey,
Thank you
yours looks
for.
great. Yours looks great as well. I love that you've still got color.
I'm catching up. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Well, thank you, my friend, for the blessing of this time. When is your new book coming out, and when can we pre-order it, and when can we get it, and all that good stuff?
It will be through Hay House, and I am I have a phone call this afternoon where we're working out a lot of those details. But I would say sometime 2015, you'll see the new material, some new online programs, and then a new book to support that. Taking everything that we've talked about even further with new discoveries that we couldn't even get into today.
And the website, brother, for them to catch up with you and subscribe for your emails and all that?
Yeah, our website is, thank you, Panache, I appreciate that. The website is www.greggbraden.com, and it's Gregg with two G's, Greggbraden. It means it's not a Gregory, it's just a Gregg.
Make sure you go and see Gregg's website and follow him on social media. He's fantastic, and he's just an infinite source of just incredible inspiration as to how we bridge the modern world and how we navigate this wonderful holographic simulation that we get to call life. My sweet friend, it has been an absolute honor to share this space with you and just marvel in the wisdom and insight that lives in your heart. And I am so grateful for you. I'm so grateful that you took the time to be here. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone that's going to watch this. And so just, I love you with all that I am. And thank you for being there for me, for being there as this expression in the world, and for just having the courage to follow your heart above and beyond all else. I can't even begin to tell you how much it means to me. So thank you, my sweet friend. And I know you have to go. I want to be respectful of your time. So
I'm loving you right back, my brother. Thank you so very much, and all of our friends out there today. Bye bye.
thanks, Greg. Well, thank you for hanging out with me, guys. And this is another Soul Signature Hangout. If you have yet to subscribe to my channel, subscribe here or here or here or wherever the button is. Just hit that red button. And it's my honor to continue to bring you incredible individuals like Greg, as together we support you in exploring a greater dimension of who we are as human beings. I love you all with all that I am, and I thank you, my sweet friends, for loving me. Until the next time.